Hello, and welcome to day 5 of GDC Showcase. I'm Gamma Sutra's news editor and associate publisher and your host for this AMA, Alyssa McAloon. I'll be moderating today's session with Brian Horton, creative director at Insomniac Games. We'll be taking your questions throughout the chat, so feel free to drop those in the questions tab in the little chat box on the right side of your screen throughout. Kind of keep things geared towards game development as we are GDC here, and we'll try to get your answers throughout the show. So with that, let's introduce today's AMA guest. Brian, hello. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks so much, Alyssa. It's an honor to be invited at GDC to talk about Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. My name is Brian Horton. I'm the creative director at Insomniac Games. A quick bio for me. I've been a developer for about 26 years and a creative director at Insomniac for the past 3.
Awesome. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to answer some questions. I'm really excited to do that, but I'd also like to provide some context and a short story overview and the pillars that helped make our game happen. So does that sound like something we can do?
Yeah, all for it. Let's go.
All right. So, I would say working on Spider-Man definitely has been a career highlight because my love for this iconic web slinger runs deep. Like most kids from the 70s, I watched the Spider-Man cartoons every Saturday morning. My mom made me homemade Spider-Man outfits when I was a kid, and I rocked them in Halloween. And of course, I poured through all my classic Spider-Man comics. But years later, I rediscovered my love for the iconic web slinger in Miles Morales. Brian Michael Bendis and Sarah Pichelli brought a fresh new energy to the franchise, and it was a huge influence on the Insomniac team. We fell in love with Miles, and it was essential to make a video game origin story that was special experience. And it started with our first game, Marvel Spider-Man. Miles is an Afro-Latino teen born and raised in Brooklyn. His passions include science, playing ball, mixing beats, and his favorite hero, Spider-Man. And in our story, Peter is an older and more experienced hero. And this provided us a unique opportunity for a new take on the origin story with Miles. So when he was bitten by a genetically engineered spider and discovered his new powers, it was destiny that Peter would be his mentor and show Miles the ropes to become a hero. So this brings us to the beginning of the game in Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. It's a year later, and it's the first day of winter break. Miles' skills will be put to the test. When Rhino escapes a prison convoy, carving a path of destruction across Manhattan, Peter is injured in the battle, and Miles must protect his mentor. Bioelectricity will surge through his body, and an explosive new power helps him to defeat Rhino. But after this harrowing encounter, Miles learns his mentor is leaving town for a couple weeks, and this huge responsibility weighs on Miles. But he's not alone. His best friend, Genki Lee, knows his spider secret and will support Miles while he stays with him over winter break. The Morales family recently moved from Brooklyn to his mother's childhood apartment in East Harlem. It's a vibrant and multicultural community made even more beautiful by the fresh snow and holiday decorations. But all isn't well in Miles' new home. Roxxon is days away from opening a new power plant in the heart of Harlem, powered by an experimental energy source called Newform. Rio Morales, Miles' mom, runs for city council to fight Roxxon's push into Harlem and to protect the people and neighborhood she loves. And like all great Spider-Man stories, Miles' personal and hero lives collide when his mother's rally is attacked by the Underground, a high-tech criminal army led by the Tinkerer, who steals Roxxon's Newform. When Miles tries to stop her, his powers destabilize this experimental energy source, resulting in an explosion that destroys Braithwaite Bridge, only deepening his doubts as a hero. So that's a little bit of a primer of our story, but ultimately, this is a game where Miles must rise to the challenge to become his own Spider-Man, overcoming his fears and mastering his new powers to stop the war that threatens his new home. And we built this game on 3 pillars that are an evolution from the first game while taking full advantage of the power of the PlayStation 5. Our first pillar is to become an explosive new Spider-Man. Our second was to protect your home from two warring factions. And the third is to play a seamless cinematic experience. So in our first pillar, become an explosive new Spider-Man, we wanted Miles to play differently from Peter, with new combat, traversal, and gadgets that reflect his unique powers, bioelectricity and optical camouflage, and his unique personality. So when you see Miles swing through the city, he has his own unique take on how he is a web slinger. So these powers are going to grow throughout the game as Miles and the player become more experienced. In our second pillar, protect your home from two warring factions, Harlem is ground zero for a two-sided war between Roxxon and the Underground, and Miles must defeat these threats to protect his family, friends, and all the people of Harlem. In our final pillar, play a seamless cinematic experience, we wanted the player to have an uninterrupted journey from beginning to end, eliminating loading screens that keep the player engrossed in the story and gameplay. So Insomniac's games mission is to make a positive and lasting impact in people's lives. And Miles lives up to these ideals, earning the name Spider-Man by embracing those unique powers to save Harlem. So it was an honor to work with PlayStation, Marvel Games, and the talented actors and amazing developers at Insomniac Games to bring Marvel Spider-Man to life. And I really want to thank GDC for inviting me to talk to you guys today and answer some of your questions. So with that, I think we should just go ahead and ask away.
Yeah, they've been flowing in. So we'll just go ahead and get started here. Coming from, let's see, this is kind of going to mix a question from Tremaine in chat with a question from Emilius in chat, talking about how Miles Morales differs from Peter as like a protagonist mechanically. So Tremaine wanted to know, they noticed that Miles is not as strong or can't jump as high or as far as Pete. Was this a conscious decision made from the start, or was this made for balancing with Miles's other abilities?
Yeah, I think we really looked at ways that we can offset the power set between Peter and Miles. And one of those was, some of the distances strengths that he has as a character. He's not as experienced as Peter. He's not quite as strong. But what we do have to complement against that is the power of his bioelectric punches. And with that, with bioelectricity, he's also able to dash and go across large distances. So when you're swinging through the world and you have a Venom bar available, you can actually dash using Venom Dash to gain more speed. So we found that our new powers was a way to offset and create some of the dynamism that we may have pulled back from the first game.
Cool. That kind of flows right into what Emilius was asking here, saying that as Peter players would, oh no, it's scrolled, where'd it go? Sorry, this is live chat here. So as Peter, the player would progress and earn new abilities via suit upgrades. Miles, on the other hand, already has a few abilities at naturally, most of them render the ones Peter had redundant if transported to this game. Can you talk a bit more about the creative choice to remove all suit abilities and replace them with passive mods? Maybe also a bit about intertwining his abilities with key level moments.
Yeah, the passive mods was something that we came to as a really exciting way to give the players that mix and match capability of new powers and really to start chasing those suits. People love getting new suits, so we are still getting a reward for each suit that you could craft. But that said, we wanted to balance that against the powers. So when you had suit powers before, they were like these really amazing OP skills, which were a lot of fun. But what we wanted to do instead was leverage all of Miles' bioelectric attacks as a way to get some of that spectacle back and balance the suit power. So by having the suit mods, we think that was a good way to still encourage suits and acquisition of suits to get new things, but also lean more into Miles' inherent powers and abilities.
Awesome. So I'm going to take another question from Joaquin here in chat, but I'm also going to hijack it a bit with my own
These are all
question.
great questions, by the way. I want to say these are wonderful.
There's so many more in here that we're going to get to that are incredible, and keep them coming throughout. We'll get to as many as we have time for. So the next question here is, how are you guys able to plan and schedule the development length for this kind of smaller Spider-Man adventure? Mm-hmm. And I'm also curious personally about doing this during a pandemic. If you could kind of talk about your just development for the whole game, schedule-wise.
Sure. Yeah, we knew we had the fantastic foundation of Marvel Spider-Man, which I had the honor to work on with Brian Horton and the whole team. But so we had a lot of the core key systems from the first game, which allowed us to really quickly iterate. And our focus was, how do we make Miles feel unique? That was the first thing we did. So we spent a lot of our early pre-production time just developing Miles' unique core skill sets. And also we were developing a whole new cast of enemies. So the Underground posed a whole new kind of level of threat. And we wanted to make sure that their powers worked specifically against it was a nice ballet between Venom bioelectricity and their programmable matter weapons. So we spent a lot of the early development developing those systems, and also Miles' unique traversal style. So that's where we spent a lot of our pre-production, and we were able to roll into production in a very short amount of time because of the foundation of the first game. So we did build our game in vertical sort of slices. So we had multiple slice productions where we work on portions of the game, and that brought them up to a quality that you could play the whole game from beginning to end. We also developed our story very early on and tested it all along the way with storyboards before we went to the mocap stage. And that goes into the final set question, which is how we dealt with the pandemic. Luckily, we had a lot of our cinematic shot, but we had a number of story revisions that came after alpha that meant that we needed to get new data. But with a pandemic, we couldn't go to the stage. So our animation team did an amazing job adapting old data, getting new data either from a remote access safe location, or they even recorded some of their own data themselves to help assemble these scenes in a very unique way that we've never done before. So I just wanted to give a really big shout out to our animation team for being so ingenious during the pandemic.
I've talked to a couple developers at this. We did a GDC podcast episode with the Jackbox folks a while ago, and talking to people about the pandemic. It's so interesting to hear where the timing works out for like where it hit. And these projects we're kind of like seeing now and saw a few months ago, just how like everything was torn asunder towards the end and the middle, and how devs adapted to it. So thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Let's see. Another one from Harris here says it was revealed a couple years ago how much technical wizardry was cleverly concealed by the direction of the opening cutscene of Spider-Man in Spider-Man, the first one. Is there any moment in particular in Miles Morales that comes to your mind as achieving seamless parity across the technical and the creative sides?
Yeah, so we really took on our third pillar, the play a seamless cinematic experience, even a step further from Spider-Man. There are no loading screens in Miles Morales on the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5. So that was a big goal for us. So we start our game in the subway with Miles Morales, and as soon as you hit start, you seamlessly enter into the city and begin the video game with no loading screens. So there was a lot of trickery we had to do to think about how do we get into Miles' apartment without a loading screen, and then out into the world. All of those were innovations that the team worked on together on this on Miles Morales to make that even more seamless and more immersive.
So kind of bouncing off those pillars there again, Z in chat wants to know, can you tell us a bit about the pillars from the first game for comparison and how they changed for the second game to distinguish the experience of Miles Morales?
Yeah, the pillars in the first game was driven off of the idea to play like a Marvel movie feels, the idea of getting this bombastic, amazing sense of cinematic drama that you get from a Spider-Man, and bring that to responsive, fast gameplay. So that was a guiding principle that I think Brian Intihar and the team really drove towards. That brought a level of spectacle and fun factor to the Spider-Man franchise. So that is still a foundation of what we build on. These pillars were additive. They were just a way for us to really be super specific about a Miles character, the story he had, the threats, and our theme of Miles learning his new neighborhood, his new home of Harlem, and how he was going to let that be fuel to learn how to become a new Spider-Man. So that's, I think, the biggest change was being very specific about how this was going to be a Miles Morales experience versus just a Peter Parker experience.
I guess let's talk a bit more about crafting Miles as a character. There's a lot of comments coming to chat here about seeing diversity in video games, seeing like a deaf character, or even like Miles's family, or like LGBT inclusion. So we'll start at the top here with Tremaine's question got upvoted very quickly. So they say they're all about diversity and love the game. So when it was decided that Miles would get his own game, how did you go about making sure that Harlem and its residents were properly represented? Some studios failed to get the properly part, but you guys nailed it.
Authenticity was one of our key ingredients too across the whole franchise. When we talk about his new home of Harlem, a lot of that started with research. Our team did exhaustive amount of research to ensure that the city itself felt authentic, the people within it as well. We actually went to Harlem with a group of people to talk to the residents of Harlem and to show them early builds of our game to get an idea. It's like, hey, does Miles' apartment feel correct? and we talk to people with mixed ethnicities to ensure not only is Miles as a Black American, but having Puerto Rican roots, are those cultures and those different aspects of his personality and the culture being represented correctly. So we actually made a lot of and got a lot of amazing data and made some informed decisions how we can get better representation across the game, not only in the way the world looks, but the people themselves. And a big shout out to our narrative team, Ben Arfman as the lead writer, Mary Kenny as a senior writer. Mary Kenny worked very closely with Evan Narcissus, one of our story consultants, to ensure all the people of Harlem, the quest givers, felt correct. So Haley is one of our, we're so proud of bringing Haley to the game, who it really is just a powerful community organizer, but also just the next level of representation by showing authentic ASL between Miles and her in the game. That was a huge innovation for both story and also animation. So yeah, we just feel like research and asking questions and working with people outside of our team to help ensure that everything we did on the screen was authentic and correct.
So Angelica in chat here has a question about ASL. They say that they love that ASL made an appearance in the game. Can you talk about the decision to bring that into the game and kind of what kind of challenges the team had to do to make that as successful as it was?
So it was Mary Kenny wanted to create a deaf character in the game, and Haley was born. But that came with it a number of technical challenges, like how do we correctly capture ASL in the game? So we actually hired ASL actors, Haley specifically, and even Miles, who is played by Najee Jeter. We had someone who spoke ASL or was fluent in ASL to do the mocap, and we created brand new technology at the capture stage and with our animators to ensure that all of the finger movements were captured correctly. So there was a lot of work to ensure that that this was going to be done right. And we actually brought a consultant in as well on the day of the stage to ensure anything that we wrote in the script, if there were any words or anything that needed to be unique, or sorry, that was not authentic or correct, that we would make those adjustments on the stage, including the fact that Miles is actually not as experienced with ASL. So his version of ASL is very different than Haley's as a beginner versus someone who's more experienced.
And like, it sounds like that having that kind of technology and taking the time to go through those steps and establish like workflows for that makes it easier for including that stuff in the future too.
100%. I think it was an innovation that we'll be building on in the future.
All right. Another question here another one from Tremaine. Thank you. Can you walk us through a typical day as a creative director for Insomniac? What are your responsibilities, pressures, and what do you enjoy?
Well, one, Insomniac Games is just an amazing company to work for. We have a philosophy that great ideas come from everywhere. So anyone on the team is contributing on the core of what makes Spider-Man or any game we work on unique. So it's about finding and pulling and collecting the ideas from our team and trying to come up with a vision that allows people to contribute ideas. So if I think about my typical day, it starts first very early on to make sure that there is a clear vision and goal. Once we have that, then it really just is a matter of, on a day-to-day basis, working with the team and helping steer to the final result that we're trying to accomplish. But it is a day-to-day usually is a lot of conversations early, working very closely with Cam Christian, the game director, Jess Reed, the head of production, and other leadership group to make sure that every single person that is leading this effort has a clear direction and goal of what they need to do. And then, throughout the day, it's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of playing the game, and asking questions and hopefully providing some direction that's going to get us to the next level. And then, we do it all over again every day. So it's a really fun and collaborative experience.
Just kind of building on that. Obviously, you didn't like wake up one day, join the game industry, and suddenly be a creative director. How did you kind of get to where you are now? And I guess what lessons did you carry forward from other roles you've had?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I went to art school, so I'm trained as an illustrator and a painter, and I got my first job at Disney Interactive in 1994, right out of college. And then from there, I've just progressed from different companies. Worked at DreamWorks. I worked at Electronic Arts. I worked at Crystal Dynamics on Tomb Raider, and that was where I really learned a tremendous amount of that AAA video game development before going to Infinity Ward and eventually coming to Insomniac Games. So yeah, across 26 years, I've picked up a lot of things. But one thing I will say is working at Insomniac, it is a mixture of excellence and really taking care of the team, the well-being of the team. That's something that we really are priding ourselves on, and actually making a positive statement in the world, that our mission to make a positive, lasting impact. To me, that's a reason to want to make video games, is to say something important. So yeah, I've been very fortunate to sort of grow from an artist to a lead artist to an art director, and eventually into game direction and creative direction. And that's been a gradual experience.
I guess speaking of jumps from one thing to another, PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5 for Marvel Spider-Man versus Miles Morales. Gonna grab a couple of questions on that quick, but we'll start off with Brian's here. It says, hey, Brian, can you talk about Insomniac's engine evolution from PS4 to PS5 and what you were able to achieve with the new console tech?
Yeah, we have an amazing core team who works on our engine. Abdul, one of our senior programmers, created our ray trace reflections for the PlayStation 5, and that was one of our huge innovations. And what that really means is to make sure that if you think of New York City, it's a city of skyscrapers made out of glass, right? Mm-hmm. So if every single surface can reflect correctly, and you can see the characters in the world reflecting, the world just becomes that much more rich and realistic looking. The other area that we focused on is allowing options of how you play. So you can either play at 60 frames per second, at a near 4K, or you can play at a hybrid 60 frames per second at a lower resolution that's upscaled, or you can play at 30 frames per second with full ray tracing. So we had all these different options to give the player more choice on how they played the game. But any mode that you play on the PlayStation 5 is definitely the most superior Spider-Man experience you can have. It truly is amazing to play the game in 60 frames per second with ray tracing in our hybrid mode. So it's been a really amazing progress, to see our technology grow from the PlayStation 4, which already looked amazing, into the PlayStation 5 on launch day. That was a huge accomplishment, and kudos to our tech team.
So, of course, Miles Morales is available on both PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. Can you talk a little bit about kind of developing for these two different kinds of technology with different capabilities and making those experiences like good on both sides of the fence? Because it'd be easy to go forward and be like, well, here's all these cool PlayStation 5 features and have the PlayStation 4 version left out. But it seems like you guys achieved a balance.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure the PlayStation 4 consumer is going to get a Spider-Man experience that they were accustomed to. So the same level of fidelity of art and storytelling and characterization, all of that, all the gorgeous graphics, all of that we saw on the PlayStation 4 is represented. But we wanted to make sure we had this upside, this idea when you did go to the PlayStation 5, these other ingredients would really help contribute to the overall experience. And in addition to the visuals, we really did enhance the 3D audio in the game. We wanted to make sure that the haptic controller was getting maximum use. So when you do play with haptics, it really does add another level of immersion. So I think that's the big difference, is the tremendous pieces of hardware like the controller, the 3D audio, in addition to the capabilities to run at 60 and with ray tracing. Those are the big differences.
I think like Miles Morales was the first game I played that had the adaptive trigger functionality in it. So like that was like my first moment was like swinging and being like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. It was a great way to showcase that tech. We're not here to talk about what I care about.
Oh, no, I think that's great. Thanks for playing the game, by the way. That's great, Alyssa.
I'm bad at it, but it's incredible. Ellen in chat wants to ask if you can talk a bit about the animation challenges your team faced to show how Miles is more inexperienced with web slinging in combat compared to Peter.
Sure. I'm just going to give a big shout out to James Ham. He did a lot of the principal animation and traversal that it gave the personality of Miles Morales versus Peter Parker. As soon as you play that first moment where you web swing as Miles Morales, you can feel that it's a different character. And a lot of that came down to James putting himself into the idea. He sort of does amateur parkour, and he loves movement, and he's a big fan of the character, and he wanted to bring a different personality to Miles Morales. So that was a big part of it, is like, how do we get his web slinging feeling unique. And you're going to see a little bit more of out of control, but also a little bit more style. We put a lot of effort into additional manual tricks. So he's going to have fun. He's like a younger, new Spider-Man. We wanted the player to have this sense of joy when they swung through the city, and augmenting that with more performable tricks. So that was a huge part. And then when it came to the combat, we wanted a little bit more desperation and clumsiness, but also this tremendous power when you see him performing all the different bioelectric moves. And then the other thing that's really exciting is the fact that Miles has this optical camouflage. He can now scare people by going invisible and redirecting into different places. So that also informed a lot of the way he moves through the world. So and then I'd be remiss not to see Najee Jeter, who has done such a great job bringing life to the character. And every cinematic and all the VO you hear, that informs a lot of who the character is as well.
There's a second part to Ellen's question that I accidentally did not read. They're curious about, while you're going through those animations to make them kind of distinctly Miles and a little bit more unexperienced, were there ever concerns about it becoming unclear what the player was doing, or kind of like, I don't know, inexperience on Miles' side, making the player feel like they might be doing something wrong?
Yeah, we wanted to balance the flare and like him, like sort of like arms, in the air, legs, the bicycling that might happen on with his legs. All of that is flare, but not necessarily to make you feel out of control. So anytime you wanted to go up to a place, it still had the same accuracy of Spider-Man. But what we wanted to do is on those in-between things, provide a level of animation that just gave him a different personality. So we didn't want to mess up a lot of what made Spider-Man great, which was that accurate and fluid traversal from the first game.
You got me scrolling questions here. There was one that was very good about, I'm so sorry, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't find it in this growing list of questions. Talking about kind of getting that cinematic experience you talked about before. Can you talk a bit about maybe the technical kind of like tricks that you guys used, or experiences from past games that you've drawn on to kind of make this like seamless movie-like experience where the player still feels involved in it?
Yeah, I would say the bridge sequence was one of our big places of innovation, in addition to going in and out of interiors, which was one thing. But as far as like on the sticks, we wanted to have these micro cinematic moments that led into interactivity. And every time you did what we called exotic abilities, let's say like webbing up a bus, you're still using all of your buttons that you would use in gameplay. We would just make sure we framed the camera in a way that looked more cinematic. So whenever we could, we'd make these little micro cinematic moments that led into an interactive moment. And we try to keep the QTE amount down by making you feel like anything that might have been considered a QTE was not abstract. It felt connected to the buttons and inputs that you would be used to in the game. So the bridge sequence is probably the best expression of that.
I found the questions I was paraphrasing. That was half something Liana asked and half something Thomas asked in chat here. So credit where credit is due.
Great.
Just to build on Thomas's a bit more and kind of what you just talked about, what was the key to delivering chasing and escaping experiences so successfully? Can the same concepts/ideas be applied for less cinematic and more player controlled experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always trying to put as much control in the player's hands whenever we possibly can. So then it just comes down to, how can we bring more cinematography into gameplay itself? So I think that's a big push for us going forward, is continuing to evolve that so we never lose control and try to put all actions in the player's hands, but still try to find opportunities where we can play with the camera.
You're gonna have to stop me if I don't know how much you can talk about this one. It's always a great way to start off a question. I guess working with an established IP, can you talk a bit about kind of being creative in that space when you're working with a character that has so much like history and established lore?
Yeah, what's wonderful about Miles is he has a little under 10 years of lore, right? So there was a lot of room for us to grow. But as a franchise, Spider-Man has over 60, right? He has much larger history. But I think what's great about Marvel Games is they're so willing to work with us as partners to build on the established norms. So you'll see a lot of things that we did in the first game and things we did in the second game that deviate from the comic books, but that's all built on trust and conversations that we have to say, does this still feel in keeping with the character? And that's what we always have to ask ourselves when we make a change. Like the Tinkerer, for instance, being female and younger, and a friend of Miles Morales. That was something that we innovated for this game.
And kind of building off of those story beats, you can subvert expectations in a fun, exciting way as well, which is always fun to see unfold.
That's the hope, right?
We have 24 seconds here, and there's so many more questions in chat.
Sorry.
It's the nature of time. It's unforgiving. So I guess if anyone wants to reach out to you about more kind of like Spider-Man development questions, can they hit you up on Twitter or email?
Yeah,
or should they
at
reach
Brian
out?
Horton Art, hit me up, and I would be happy to answer as many questions as I possibly can.
Awesome. Thank you to everyone in chat for all your wonderful questions. Thank you for making Spider-Man Morales with the rest of your wonderful, or Spider-Man Miles Morales with the rest of your wonderful team. And have a great rest of your showcase, everyone.
Bye.